And I am the only member of my family ever to have hearing loss. I have 3 siblings, and my parents did not have hearing loss. My grandparents didn't, as far as I know. My father was on an aircraft carrier in World War II and had only kind of mild age-related hearing loss. So my hearing loss is an aberration in my family. I don't know who cut our hair in this picture, but this is us. I can't figure out why this isn't advancing, Steve. Can you tell me? Let me try it this way. Okay. Okay. So as Steve said, I lost my hearing when I was 30, and it was very sudden. I woke up one morning, I was working at my desk at home, and I answered the phone with the phone up to my left ear because I was writing an article and I used my right hand to take notes. It was quite frightening, and I also felt very sick. I was a little bit dizzy. I went to an ENT, I think after a day or two, who did all the appropriate things that even now should be done with sudden and especially single-sided hearing loss, an MRI. He tested me for autoimmune diseases and made sure that I didn't have anything explainable, and I didn't have anything explainable, which means that my hearing loss is idiopathic, which is a word that always bothers me. It's a little too close to idiot, but what it means is that we don't know. And 43 years later, my hearing loss is still not explained. So what did I do about it back then? The answer is nothing. I was 30. I could hear all right from my right ear. I had a prescription for a hearing aid, but I didn't fill it. I didn't have a caption phone. I'm not sure they even existed then. I didn't consider learning sign language because I was oral and I could hear all right out of my right ear. And if there were accommodations, I don't know what they were, and I didn't ask for them. So I went through the next 20 years, no hearing aid. I got married and I had 2 children who you can see in this picture. You can see they managed to grow up unscathed by my hearing loss. I was never able to hear anything at a school assembly or graduation. On my right is my husband who died last year. And this is, we're all going to a celebration here on the subway. The celebration wasn't on the subway, we took the subway. So for work, I was in those early years a freelance magazine writer in my 30s. And in spite of my hearing loss, I went on quite adventurous reporting trips to Turkey several times, to the Yucatan, Crete. I went to Antarctica, and I heard well enough with my good ear, I think. This is a picture I took in Antarctica, which was used as a publicity photo for, sorry. Oh no. I'll shut him out of the room. Just 1 minute. I'm so sorry. Anyway, this is Ira Flato, who has shows still on NPR. And they use this as a publicity photo, and I love it. But that's really what Antarctica looked like. Ira later told me that he did think that he noticed that I had hearing loss when I was in Antarctica. So I was already fooling myself. I went on to fool myself right straight through 22 years at the New York Times. I'm sorry, I have to let the dog out. I apologize. All right, I went to New York at the Times when I was 40, and I just didn't want to do that foreign travel anymore with small children. But that was where my hearing loss really caught up with me. This is a picture of the New York Times newsroom. This is the building that they moved into in the mid, I think it was in the late, in the 2000s. And it's an acoustic nightmare. You can see this is the main newsroom down in the middle center. On the bottom is where all the important news editors stand. And then that red thing is a staircase that leads up to the second floor. I worked on the second floor. Everything echoed. That's an atrium that was hard edged, or you can see the cubicles aren't even cubicles. We're all on top of each other. People knew that I had hearing loss. I told my immediate superiors, but I'm sure everybody's experienced this. They immediately forgot. And I was expected to talk, to hear people talk to me from across the room, people talking to me when I wasn't looking at them. It was really difficult. I got hearing aids before we moved into that new building when I was 52. And that was 2002. And by age 60, 8 years later, I had really severe bilateral hearing loss. And there I still was in the workplace. I think for people who didn't know me, it looked like I was doing fine. I had a really quite great job. My husband and I had been together for 30 years. We had healthy children, a life of relative privilege, but it had finally caught up. Denial took a toll on my physical and mental health, and it was visible, even if the hearing loss wasn't. I had terrible insomnia. I could only sleep 2 hours at a time. I was very depressed. I stopped seeing my friends. I was really unpleasant to my family. And my relationships all around were really corroded. I think we've all had this experience. Maybe some of you started off better than I did, but pretending to be normal is really exhausting. Just to backtrack, this is my audiogram this is the oldest audiogram I have. It's not the one from when I was 30. It's when I started at the New York Times. They did a pre-employment audiogram because they wanted to make sure that if anyone lost their hearing while they were employed by the Times, we wouldn't be able to claim workman's compensation. This was in the days when the really loud printing presses were still in the basement. So you can see my right ear at the top there is pretty normal. My left ear has very strange up and then down, way, way, way down. In 2009, which was 20 some years later, this is just before I got my cochlear implant, my right ear's corrected is okay. Uncorrected, it kind of dribbles, and my left ear is way, way, way down. I really couldn't hear anything at that point. So I got a cochlear implant. When I got my cochlear implant in 2009, it was not very well known, and it was regarded as a miracle. It is a miracle. The technology is amazing. My ENT had been one of the surgeons on one of the first cochlear implants on children, and he always said to me, "Don't worry, you'll never be deaf." Well, I know now that what he was talking about is that I would be able to get a cochlear implant. I am actually deaf without my cochlear implant, but I wasn't aware of that at the time. But the miracle also depends on the people who are benefiting from it. And I did not understand at the time, and it wasn't really made clear to me about how hard I would have to work to hear with my cochlear implant. I was still in the workplace. I was very stressed, and I was never offered auditory rehab, which I think now, most departments agree is important with a cochlear implant. I didn't have assistive technology. I was floundering. I did start, and in fact, several different times did auditory rehab, and I hear quite well with my cochlear implant now. It just took me a really long time to get there. I'm completely dependent on it now with my hearing aid. So I joined HLAA almost immediately after I left the New York Times, luckily, because I was very bereft when I left the Times. Like a lot of long-term employees, I had, it kind of defined who I was. And HLAA really came through for me, as it does for many people. And so what I want to sort of talk about here is Their information, education, support, and advocacy, which is what HLAA does, and which I think all of us really need to try to do in our personal lives. So information, I'm going to go through these one at a time. Information is important. I think a lot of people understand that noise causes hearing loss, but I don't think they understand exactly how. I don't think many people understand the how large a role heredity can play in hearing loss. A lot of people know the term ototoxic drugs, but I think they don't really know what the drugs are, and aren't aware that, you know, they might be something to avoid. Trauma, of course, which is the cause of most of the hearing loss in troops returning from the the Gulf War and all the subsequent wars. Hearing loss and tinnitus are the two largest causes of disability payments in the military. And disease. Disease is not so much an issue with us here in this country, but it's an enormous issue internationally in developing countries. I serve on the Lancet Commission for Global Hearing Loss, and we're coming up with recommendations about how hearing loss can be addressed and treated, prevented in very poor countries, and it's a really interesting challenge. So I think people don't realize that they are endangering their hearing really basically every day. Things we have around us in our household are really noisy. I don't think anyone's going to put on their earplugs to go in and run the blender, or but they should when they're using a power saw. People really should wear protection at football games. Restaurants, I mostly avoid them. I just find them impossibly loud and hard for me to hear. But what people don't really understand is that dangerous noise levels it's not just it's not the level of the noise. It's really a combination of time and intensity. And I've loved this picture. I'm sure I've sat in front of this little girl on a plane. She's really loud, but that's not going to go on for more than about 2 or 3 hours, and it'll ruin your trip, but it's probably not going to affect your hearing. Information about the most common causes of hearing loss is actually still not completely sorted out. There's a lot of overlap between age-related hearing loss and noise-related hearing loss. And I think most people are thinking that early exposure to noise and lingering and frequent exposure to noise in the workplace it makes any kind of age-related hearing loss even more dangerous than or even more serious than it might be otherwise. But even people who live in extremely quiet environments sometimes have age-related hearing loss. So some of it really just does have to do with our ears and our brains beginning to let us down a little bit. Hearing loss is really hard to explain. And one reason I wrote Shouting Won't Help was because it gave me an opportunity to talk. I profiled quite a few other people besides myself in the book about their hearing loss, and everyone's hearing loss experience is different. So education, I think, is part of HLAA's mission, of course, but I also think it's part of ours individually. I think we really, we need to tell people what it is that we're experiencing, and it's not easy. It's gotten a lot easier. I think there've been some good films, there've been some misleading films. But I think that, maybe it's our aging population, but hearing loss is becoming, it's on people's radar now. One of the things I try to explain is that I can hear everything. I just don't know what anyone's saying. And I'm sure if you've had these tests, tried to distinguish between the words sheep and mess and nest and witch and rich. I can't do it. I can't even really do it hearing myself saying them right now. But what we do learn is that in context, these really difficult words to distinguish come to make sense. I do quite well on sentence recognition. So I made this little chart up and then put these 5 words together into a sentence. The Viking Thor chose as his chore to take the foreshore and give them a tour. So I think I'd be able to understand that, but I would never be able to distinguish those 5 words from each other. Listening strategies are extremely important. And I'm sure in your chapter in Westchester, you've spent a lot of time talking about how to maximize your ability to hear what someone's saying, how to tell somebody how to talk to you. But there are people who, just are going to defy any effort you make to hear. And I like this one. Not only does he have these magnificent mustaches, but he has very thin lips, which makes it hard to read lips. And he's looking off in another direction. If he were actually talking to you, that would make speech reading even harder. So most people with hearing loss can't read sign language. I think all of us know that, but I don't think the world knows that. Partly because sign language interpreters are so visible, partly because sign language is so beautiful. I think it really eclipses what the rest of us really, which is about 96% of people with hearing loss, what our needs are. So I look at this picture, it looks like a college classroom, and I think, where's the cart screen? Why isn't the teacher wearing an FM transmitter? Is there an induction loop in this room? And if so, why isn't there any sign about it? Education also, I think we need to tell people why we're sometimes so unpleasant, those of us with hearing loss, that it's really serious. We do get depressed. We do crave isolation. We experience anxiety. We experience paranoia. You wonder what someone's saying about you. Did you really hear that? Is that really what he was saying? In addition, there are physical risks, definitely well documented increased risk of falls, especially with untreated hearing loss, balance issues. And of course, there's the increased risk of cognitive decline, which I think a lot of us are most concerned about. Hearing takes place primarily in the brain, because we can replace the cochlea, but we can't replace the brain. So if we are not treating our hearing loss, we're allowing the speech pathways of the brain to be taken up and used for other senses, other functions. So and that can lead to an effect on executive function. It leads to decreased cognitive reserve, which makes it hard to remember. And then there is, as I said, this physical atrophy of the auditory areas of the brain. So do hearing aids help? This is a big question that I think we're all waiting to get the answer to this. We don't know what the relationship between hearing loss and early onset and more severe dementia is. There's a large randomized clinical trial going on right now at Hopkins, and that may clarify whether treating hearing loss reduces the risk. But my feeling is, and I say this to people all the time, why wait? Get your hearing aid now. And if it turns out that actually it's not going to help reduce your decline, at least you're going to be having more fun in the meantime. You'll be able to hear people talking. So all of this, my experience with HLA in particular, really helped me regain my confidence, which was pretty shot when I left the Times. And so I like this picture. I wanted to include it in this talk. This is a trip that I made with 12 other people to the Uyghur region of China, which is now very oppressed area. But on the way back, we took a camel ride in the desert. And I think if I could do that, I can kind of probably do anything. I mean, it wasn't that hard. Someone told me how to do it and helped me get up on the camel, but it was a challenge being there. And it was a challenge hearing my co-travelers. It was a challenge hearing the guide. But everybody kind of came through for me. It was great. So I think one of the things I have learned a lot in recent years, and that I have not really truly understood either, is the role of stigma. And I think one way to look at it is whether you would rather be looked at as someone with hearing loss, which is a medical condition that is correctable, at least to some extent, with hearing aids, or the alternatives are that people see that you or wonder if you're senile, if you're drunk, if you're stupid, burned out, snobbish, and so on down this list. I have been told by people, some of my former colleagues at the Times, that at least a couple of these occurred to them. Ones people who didn't know that I had hearing loss wondered, thought I was burned out, or maybe nobody said they thought I was stupid, but maybe they actually did. So for me, the other thing for me with HLAA is the chapter level, which I think is just so important. And these are people in our chapter, Ruth Bernstein on the left, who I think most of you know, and I know she's here tonight. I saw her before. And then on the right is at convention in Austin, Texas. And that's me, Holly Cohen, Gail Weiss, and Tony Acolucci there. I have made so many friends through HLAA, primarily through the chapter, but also through the national office. And I don't know really where I would be now if I hadn't found HLAA. So HLAA is also, of course, involved in advocacy, and so am I. I think most of us are to some extent. I focus as much as I can on captions. I think it was this quote at the bottom, I think is from Arlene Romoff. I've never been able to quite track it down. Captions are the wheelchair ramp for the deaf. I think that's really a very important statement. And there are all different kinds of captions. I can talk about them a little bit later. Most of these things I'm going to show you now do have to do with visual communication that allows you to actually see the information that you need to hear instead of simply hearing it. The guy on the bottom with his megaphone, if you live in New York City, the subway systems for decades relied on a public address system. Nobody could understand a word that was said, including people who could hear. People who couldn't hear were just completely lost. Now we have really pretty good signage in the subway stations. We have good signage on buses. I serve on an advisory committee to the MTA, and they're working all the time to make the system more accessible. There are people who have even harder times than we do, especially people who rely on the elevators, which are a huge problem. There aren't enough of them. They break down very, very frequently. It's an interesting, it's really a challenge. So one of my primary advocacy efforts has been getting text 911 available in New York. It's been available outside of the city for a long time, and only last year did they announce that it was that they were finally going to be able to do it here. It took a really long time. I have called 911 a number of times when I saw someone who needed help, or maybe even when I needed help myself. And I'd always have to end up handing the phone over to a passerby and saying, what's the operator saying? Tell me what she wants to know. Advocacy for me, as I said before, really comes down to captioning. And this is a talk I gave when my book Shouting Won't Help came out. This is actually in Seattle. It was the second talk I gave. The first talk I gave was at Barnes & Noble in New York. And I didn't know it at the time, but my HLAA chapter friends had arranged for cart captioning. I had never seen it before. I had to turn around to look at it to see what the questions were so that I could answer them. I love cart captioning. I think it's it's right up there with cochlear implants. So it's a great invention. We've been involved in a lot of advocacy about making movie theaters more accessible. I kind of feel the way this I don't know if she's a real person, does about that captioning device that's available in movie theaters. I hope we can figure out some better way to allow us to see movies. The ideal thing would be to have open captions. I think that's going to be a long struggle. Hearing loops are something that are invaluable to people who know that they're there and have access to them. They are unfortunately not as available as we would like, especially not in our part of the country. Juliet Sturkin's state has hearing loops all over the place because she's such a great advocate. Our New York State is doing okay, but we have a long way to go. But hearing loops then is a very important kind of assistive technology. So advocacy, I think, altogether is something that really empowers us, and I think it makes us feel good. So last year, of course, we were all hit by the pandemic, and if you had hearing loss, I think there were both the negatives were worse and the positives were better. So I want to focus on the positives here. The negatives had to do with the fact that everyone was wearing masks and it was almost impossible to understand what they were saying. But I think we learned something from the pandemic. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. I think we learned, a lot of us learned how to use technology, and the technology improved during that time. So these are live captions on a smartphone. This is on an Android phone. It's Google Live Transcribe. I'm sure some of you know about it. This is shows the, you can change the typeface, the font, the size. Google Live Transcribe will tell you down there at the bottom, when my dog barks in the background, it'll say dog, just in case you're wondering what that loud noise was. I use Otter AI because I have an iPhone, and I have my phone set to look the way this slide is on the right, fairly large captions. The other thing about Otter, and I think Google Live Transcribe, is that it saves a transcript of the conversation, which is really valuable because I think a lot of us are so busy trying to absorb language that with something really important, we need to go back later and look and see exactly what was said. Otter gives you 600 free minutes per month of use, which for most people is ample. I have I pay $10 a month to have 6,000 free minutes. I don't really use all of them, but I do often forget to turn Otter off. So sometimes it just runs on by itself. I'm glad I don't run out of minutes. So InnoCaption, I'm sure most of you also know about this, is started out and it had a kind of rocky start. You had to take over one of their phone numbers, give up your own cell phone number. It's great now. You can use your own cell phone number. I find the captions are extremely accurate. They have live captioners. Sometimes they'll switch you if they think you're having just kind of a frivolous phone call with a friend. They'll switch you to automatic speech recognition. But InnoCaption, I didn't talk on the telephone for about 20 years, and InnoCaption has allowed me to go back to talking to people on the phone. It's fun. I like it. So masks were a huge problem for all of us during the pandemic, the worst months of it. And a lot of people made different efforts at making their own kind of transparent masks. These are all homemade masks. On the right, that's my daughter wearing a mask that someone sent me. It's very hard to read. You can see the lips, but it's really hard to speech read when so much of the face is covered. So fortunately, the FDA came out with this mask and another one. I forget what the trademark of this one is, but it's great. You can see her entire face. You can definitely see not only her teeth, but you can see her mouth. You can see her facial expressions, and you can really even kind of see body language there. These are all important for speech reading. I think the other thing that a lot of us learned during the pandemic is that we just had to ask for help. I've always been resistant to asking for help, but I know now how important self-advocacy is, and I'm glad I learned it. I'm glad that I don't think I'll forget it. I think now I finally understand that if I want somebody to accommodate me, I have to tell them what it is that I need. So this is my last slide. I often use this in talks just because I like this. I'm sure, I don't know whether these people really have hearing loss or not, but because I can't remember where the slide came from. I've had it for a long time. But, you know, hearing is good. And I'm really glad that I can still hear, and I'm glad I have made so many friends who have taught me how to hear better. So I think that's the end. It is. So let me go out of shared screen right now. Let me get back to you. Oh, dear. Okay, am I still on this call?
Yes.
Okay, so Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Katherine. That was a fabulous presentation. I know some of you have questions for Katherine. One or two came in on the chat earlier. And so please, if you can, raise your hand. And because we have more than 25 people, there are a couple screens. I may not see everyone at once. Another way to raise your hand is electronically by pressing the reactions button at the bottom of the screen. Then it has a red raise hand. Or you could type in your question under the chat. So don't forget to unmute your microphone if you have a question, and please introduce yourself. I could start by a question that Richard sent in earlier. He had asked about your slide dealing with captioning in theaters. His own reaction was that AMC theaters do a terrible job of captioning. Are you aware of any other theater chains that might have good captioning?
Yes, I can't remember what the name of the chain is, but they have glasses. I'm sure I know Darius in this audience. He could tell me what the
Regal.
Regal.
Oh, Regal theaters. Yeah, Regal theaters have glasses that you can wear over your glasses that are comfortable. And really, I think they're a lot better than the cup holder ones, which is what that picture of. Like the cup holders, when I've used them, they're big. They're like about 25 inches wide. They're heavy. You have to cram them down into the cup holder. I always feel like, it always makes me feel like I'm walking from the concierge desk to my seat, cradling ET in my arms. Unfortunately, then when you get there, all too often it's the wrong movie that they've programmed, or it doesn't work in some way. So they're frustrating. The Regal are better. I think what we would all like is for movie theaters to have at least a few open captioned performances of every movie every week. I think they'd be surprised how popular they are. It's hard persuading them to give it a try though. So was that the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Richard, is that a half a hand up or?
There's an interesting thing in the chat here from John Taylor,
Okay.
who filed an ADA complaint about the AMC. So I didn't know about that, John. I'd be interested in hearing more about that. And I also see right below that somebody asking about whether hearing devices that live theater uses, sometimes they're headphones, infrared, FM. Increasingly, in New York, at least, theaters are offering captioning that I haven't been to the theater in so long that I've completely blanked on what it's called, but Galapro captioning. I don't know if they can be used in movie theaters. That's an interesting question.
I know the New York City chapter has been involved in the effort to get the new Lincoln Center facility looped, and that is going to be a fact. Um, any other efforts New York City or any of the other chapters on the line have been involved in as far as looping or captioning public venues such as theaters?
Can I just talk a little bit about Lincoln Center? Um,
Yes.
Just before the pandemic shut everything down, Lincoln Center, through the efforts of Jerry Bergman, hosted Jerry, me, Sherry Eberts, and Juliet Sturkins. Those two were participating remotely, and the heads of all of the different theaters were there. They really listened. And a couple of months ago, they came back to us and said they were going to do everything that we had asked for and more. So it was really a very gratifying end to all of that. Right after the meeting was over, all of the heads of Lincoln Center had to go to an emergency meeting, and Lincoln Center closed down that very day. So we were there right at the tail end. In New York City, we've also worked with the city on a number of different proposals, some of which have gone through. City Hall is now looped. That's where the city council meets. And that was a very complicated job because it's a historic building. But they have done that. I think they have ample signs. Everything, of course, now has been closed down. So, I don't know how much is being used right now. There are a number of regulations that were passed in the city as a result of advocacy from our chapter, including the requirement that any renovation over or new building over a certain amount had to have at least one meeting room available that is looped. Some of our efforts have been for people with disabilities in general, to have a disability coordinator in every major city agency. So we've been very active, but it was all shelved during the pandemic.
Ellen, did you have your hand up earlier?
I just want to mention this, but there are a Broadway that have loops now into the, so I have a choice.
Yes, Ellen, I'm not quite following. I think what you're saying is that there are looped Broadway theaters, and,
yes,
and there's quite a few of them now, and also some off-Broadway theaters as well. I think the Irish Rep and a couple of others. We have on our website a list of looped venues that Ellen has helped to maintain over the years. It hasn't been updated recently, and I think that's because we don't know about anything that's been looped recently. But it's a good list.
Carolyn, you have your hand up.
Yes, my name's Carolyn. I'm a member of the Westchester chapter, and I'm also on the New York State Association planning for the new conference that we're doing. We recently had an issue. The conference hotel was supposed to loop the ballroom, and now they can't do it because of construction budget today. Is there any grant that they could apply to get their conference room looped? Would anybody know of any?
Is this a chain hotel? Is it like a
No. It's a small hotel. It's the historic Queensberry Hotel in Glen Falls, and we planned to hold a conference there, and they were asking, it came up in our meeting, if there was any kind of grant or fundraising that could be done to get that room looped.
I don't know. I will say that I went to Vassar College and I had my 50th reunion recently, which is a shock. Don Bataille lives up in Dutchess County, I think, and so he put temporary loops in during my the 3 days of the reunion weekend in 2 or 3 of the meeting spaces. I don't know what he charged. I wasn't involved with anything about the payment, but the temporary loops worked pretty well. They also put in, I'm very happy to say they put in 2 permanent loops in 2 large lecture halls. But you might get in touch with him if he's still upstate. I think he is.
Yes, it's upstate.
B as in boy, A-T-A-I-I-A-I-L-L-E, Bataille.
Okay. Well,
I'll tell you later.
we're talking about an option of putting in a temporary loop. Maybe one of the chapters can bring loops to set up. But we thought maybe to help out the hotel so that they can do events there for the hearing impaired in the future. You know, that was what came up in the meeting. That's why I was asking. Maybe, I don't know, Walk the Hearing Fund. I know they don't have a walk up in Albany, but
has the hotel gotten an estimate?
I know. This is
Because
something that
you could start with that when we moved to the church where we have been holding our meetings for the past 5 years. We got estimates from 3 looping companies, and in the end, one estimate was half of what another estimate was, and it was a very good loop company, and we took that, we signed that contract, and it was, they did, you know, you can.
well, I know it's just something I thought I asked if anybody knew of a grant or
maybe somebody else knows. Does anyone know?
I don't think this was hotels, but cultural affairs department of both the state for grant, but the theater that one, but there may be that do.
Okay. Okay, thank you. We'll probably have to put in a temporary loop, or we can get some funding to help the hotel through some kind of fundraising or something. Steve, I need that name of the looping company that we knew. Okay.
I will share it with you in the chat.
Okay. Thank you.
Unfortunately, if the hotel were a public venue like a museum or a library, a resident of that town could ask for that as an accommodation under ADA, and they'd really be required to do that. But since they are private, they don't have that requirement. I did see in the news very recently that the Port Authority of New York will be working on looping our local airports, much as the Rochester Airport is beautifully looped for those of you who visited there during the convention. Does anyone have any information about what the Port Authority will be doing and timing of it?
I know one thing. The Delta terminal's been at LaGuardia, I think, is installing loops as part of their renovation. And then they're also restoring what's called the central terminal or the main terminal. I've only heard about this at LaGuardia, although I have heard that the Port Authority is considering it for all of them. Again, somebody else might know this better than I do.
Jerry,
do.
did you?
I've
Yes.
been in touch with the Port Authority, and they recently, within the last 2 or 3 months, put out a long-awaited comprehensive set of recommendations for accessibility at all of their facilities, rail, air, ground, the hubs. And they specifically call attention to the preferred technology of hearing loops to be installed whenever any major renovation takes place. Remember, they are a landlord. The airlines and the other companies are their tenants. And so when those various operators do any major gate repair or renovation or build a new terminal or extend the terminal, they are required to install hearing loops unless there's a major barrier that can't be done. But that's long-term because it's new construction and renovation. We still have to ask for accessibility as best we can going forward.
From my own experience, my son, who wears an implant and hears very well, except in crowded or noisy situations, he goes to the airport, he's in the boarding area, and there are TV monitors on, often with commercials or music, and the message board says where they're going and maybe when they're boarding. It doesn't say what zone they're boarding. It doesn't give the reason for a delay or any other important information. So he's totally at a loss in that kind of situation.
The best thing that I've found people can do when they're at the boarding gate is to go up to the attendant at the counter. They are trained to be accommodating, and they say, well, show me where you'll be and I'll give you a high sign so you know when to board. And similarly, if there's an announcement of a change of gate or other flight information that's announced, you can walk up to them and they'll be happy to, explain that.
And you get pre-boarding sometimes.
Yes, I was going to say that too. If you go up and say you have hearing loss, you're not going to be able to hear when your zone is boarding, they'll say you can pre-board, which is, people pay a lot of money to do that. The other thing is that some airlines are a lot better than others, and some airports, of course, are better than others. But I usually fly Delta, and I have found that their message boards are pretty comprehensive. They do tell you what zone is boarding, where they will tell you if there's in writing if there's a gate change. I think this is happening. There are also airports that are looped in addition to the Rochester airport. The Seattle airport has loops, some loops, and I'm sure others do too. So, but as Jerry just said, really the best thing you can do is go up to the gate and ask them to give you guidance when it's time for you to board.
It's also not a bad idea to, when you do board a plane, to let the stewardess know that you won't understand the announcements that are made over the PA system. That way they can alert you if you need to be aware of something. And also, not much we can do about it, but all of the airlines have different degrees of captioning on TV screens at your seats. Some movies are available with captioning on some airlines, and other airlines are not as good. So that's also a hit or miss proposition.
Mary Whalen has a question in the chat room. She says she knows New York City chapter has done tremendous work ensuring accessibility in healthcare. Do you know of any efforts to specifically address the mental health of persons with hearing loss? Everyone has a story about either isolation, depression, interpersonal relationships, or job issues. Is there any sort of training for this to your knowledge? It seems like such an important issue.
We had a chapter meeting last spring on that topic. And I think it's something that we actually talk about kind of in the context of a lot of different issues. who is our speaker? I can't remember his name, but he writes books. He was good. He was very very
Michael
good.
Harvey?
And then we also had a researcher
Harvey.
from Columbia who talked.
Michael Harvey?
Very
Was it
nice.
Michael Harvey.
Oh, Michael Harvey? Okay.
Yeah. Harvey.
Yeah, Michael Harvey. Thank you.
Uh,
I think that's another thing that's really helped people with hearing loss, though, is telemedicine, because you can now have teletherapy. And it's my daughter's a psychotherapist, and she does all her therapy now, or has been able to, at least during the pandemic. And then you can have captions. You're looking at the person directly. It's good. It's for formal programs. I think CHC, the Center for Hearing and Communication, has a number of social workers on staff, and they also have a PhD psychologist. I think they do a really good job with counseling for people with hearing loss.
So one of the reasons that I'm asking is that many years ago, in the Westchester chapter, there was a therapist that was known to know sign language, which of course is very helpful for people who are culturally deaf and people who know sign language. But there were not many people who were trained in understanding the dynamics of hearing loss. So that's really what I've read Michael Harvey's books. He's a wonderful person, wonderful suggestions. I cry every time I read his stories, but I feel like there's something in the medical field that's missing, understanding how it's such a separate issue from just going for therapy. You see what I'm trying to convey? You know, the whole communication. We sort of suffer in silence in many ways. We don't even like to talk about it sometimes. We don't admit that we have it. I'll give an example. Many years ago, my husband was very sick and I was losing my hearing, and I didn't talk to anybody about losing my hearing. I did join HLAA, but I went for therapy, and the therapist thanked me for teaching her about hearing loss and what it feels like. So it was kind of sad. It was very nice that she was compassionate, but she didn't have any experience with people with hearing loss. Why do we either have not enough people who are reaching out to therapists, or we don't have enough therapists who let people know that they're available for that type of help. That's what I'm saying.
I have to say that the Center of the Hearing and Communication, their services, the therapists there are wonderful. I knew them, and now it's telehealth, and it's wonderful. I don't have to go to the office anymore. So they're great. So if anybody's looking for a therapist that specializes in people with hearing loss, I would recommend the Center for Hearing and Communication.
It would be, I agree with you about CHC. It would be interesting to know if they have ever considered a training program there to send therapists, train them at CHC and then send them out into the community. I think it is much needed.
Thank you.
I see a couple of comments that I think are worthy of mention in the chat room. A couple of people suggested asking for pre-boarding with your airline, and they'll usually be accommodating in letting you on the aircraft first. Another person had a comment: when using FaceTime and I guess Zoom and other visual telecommunications, make sure the person knows you need to see their face and the screen is tilted correctly so that you can see their entire face.
Again, Steve, that's self-advocacy. You have to tell them, you know, the people who they have to say, tilt your screen so we can see your face.
People
another,
are always reminding me of that. Richard, you have to tilt your screen down a little bit.
I have a comment on that. I think it's important that to underscore Catherine's point about self-advocacy, because it's something that most people with hearing loss don't do. Most people with hearing loss, we know, either don't get evaluated for hearing aids, or they do and they don't wear hearing aids, whether they've even agreed to buy them or not. If they buy them, they try them. It doesn't solve their hearing to the same degree that eyeglasses solve their vision. So they're disappointed, they're upset, they've spent money, they put them in the drawer and they forget about it. And I think as Katherine spoke earlier, the risk of the loss of cognitive ability and the onset of dementia should be reason enough for people to take hearing loss more seriously. But folks, we all know it's an invisible disability. So if we don't speak up, people just don't know, and they certainly won't understand. So we've done a great job through HLAA of speaking to each other and helping each other. I think we need to look outward more than we have before, and that's what we're trying to do through the state association now and through chapter advocacy.
Thank you, Jerry. Katherine brought up InnoCaption and what a wonderful product that is and how helpful they've been to her. InnoCaption will be presenting at our next chapter meeting on Wednesday, September 8th. I've seen their presentation to other chapters around the country. It's fabulous. Their top people are going to be on the presentation with us, so I encourage you to join us. We'll send a reminder out Wednesday, September 8th with InnoCaption. I'm looking to see if there are any other questions. Katherine, you're on mute.
yeah, I'm sorry. That's because I didn't want you to hear the dog. It is thunderstorming here, which is making the dog crazy. InnoCaption has great customer service. I had some trouble with transferring, getting my phone list there because it just took everything that had been in my old phone, which was like 2,000 people, and I only wanted about 20. And they actually, first of all, they said that they didn't have the capacity to do it, but they figured it out. And then they got back in touch with me, and then they told me how to do it. So if you're having any kind of a problem, get in touch with their customer service. They're incredibly responsive.
Okay,
I knew InnoCaption, but I would love to find out how to get it to my cell phone number. So I'll be looking forward to that meeting.
You can use your cell phone number to call out and to receive calls. You never have to tell anybody anything but your own cell phone number. But when you call out, I think the caller ID gives us a different number. It gives your.
Oh, okay.
But it usually, if you've called that person before, then you're usually just identified by their name.
That may have changed with the upgrade, Katherine. I used to be asked that question also. They would ask me on the other end of the phone if my number was a different number than my own cell number, but that hasn't happened in a while. So I think maybe now it's not the relay number, but it's your own number that does appear in the caller ID on the other end.
I may not have upgraded, but I know when I see the number across the top of the screen when I'm talking to somebody,
Oh, yeah,
that
no,
it's the InnoCaption number.
that's
It's not
still
myself.
the thing. That-
I see a couple of mechanical hands raised, so let's start with Ruth Bernstein.
I just wanted to say that I participated in a group support at CAC on how to cope in the workplace. So they have done this in the past. Maybe if people approach them, they will do it again. They are doing online therapy for anybody who wants to talk to a therapist. It's online and it's great. It's really the therapists are very good listeners.
Okay, John, you have your hand up, and then Tom.
Yeah, I wanted to second what Jerry said about the need to look outward when we're self-advocating, but I'd also like to expand on that. I think it's important to realize that when you're out in the world, whether it's at the movie theater or wherever, when you advocate for yourself, that you're actually also advocating for the entire community of people with hearing loss. You know, I mentioned that I filed an ADA complaint about the AMC at 68th Street. It was the fourth time I've had a problem there. And each time I do it, they give me passes to come back. I explained to them that it's not just a matter of me. And first of all, I don't know why I'd want to use passes at a place that doesn't give me the captioning I want, but that I'm actually speaking for the entire hearing loss community. And that I think that, you know, it's not just doing it for ourselves, which we should do, of course, but is representing the hearing loss community.
Okay, Tom.
Hi, Catherine. You mentioned that you have gotten a cochlear implant, did you not?
I do have a cochlear implant. I was implanted in 2009. So it was quite a while ago.
Could you just speak a little bit about what it was like going into the surgery and coming out and getting activated?
Yeah, well, I'm really practically had my implant done in the Ice Age now. It's gotten more streamlined. But even back in 2009, the surgery was very straightforward. You need a top-notch surgeon, but it's difficult, surgery for the surgeon. But most of them done it now millions of times, or hundreds or thousands anyway. It's very easy on the patient.
I think we lost Catherine.
I think my surgery was about 3 hours. I think it's about less than 2 now. It's day surgery. You go home afterwards. Then the best part, as far as I can tell from all the people I know who've gotten cochlear implants recently, is that the providers understand that you really do need a formal program of hearing rehabilitation. You have to work to learn how to hear with a cochlear implant, because the signals are coming electronically to your brain. They are not the same as signals from sound waves. And I now, after all these years, I actually like the sound of people's voices in my cochlear implant almost better than the sound in my hearing aid. They seem more natural to me. At the beginning, they sound a little bit maybe metallic or something, but there are a lot of people here I know from looking at the audience who've more recently gotten cochlear implants than me. But from what I hear, they've had all really excellent experiences.
Sure.
I've never heard of anybody who didn't have an excellent cochlear implant.
After the surgery, did you experience like dizziness, nauseousness, like your balance? Can you remember back?
Just immediately after. I came home and walked into my apartment and threw up, but that was only once. And then in the days immediately after, when I still had the bandages on, I was a little unsteady on my feet. But no, I have vertigo, but it's not related to my cochlear implant. My balance is pretty good.
But you recovered pretty well then, right?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I don't regret for a minute doing it. I would do it again, except I can hear better out of my cochlear implant. I mean, out of my hearing aid right now. I don't want to take the chance that I wouldn't hear as well with a cochlear implant, but I will get one of these
Oh,
days.
Tony, you have
Ruth,
your
you
hand
wanted
up.
to add to this?
Do I want to add anything, or are you asking somebody else?
Ruth?
Um,
Hi, if I could say something, can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. I just received my first and only implant in January, and I was activated in February. And about the balance issue was very interesting because I was fine after my surgery, after my activation. And about 3 or 4 weeks ago, all of a sudden I had wicked vertigo, which I've never had in my life. I had about 4 episodes and it was really tough. And all of a sudden I was kind of, losing my balance, especially after I'd be lying down or sitting down. So I was going to go for balance therapy. And I couldn't get an appointment for quite a while, and I was just kind of getting annoyed. So I just wanted to share. I have a very good acupuncturist. So I said, okay, let me give it a shot. And 4 sessions, and I have no balance problems. I mean, just the tiniest bit. After I'm lying down, I just get a little slow when I get up. And once in a while, once a week, I'll take like half a spin. But it's work. So I think we also have to be open to trying different things. But it's been very successful for me. So I just wanted to share that.
Tony, it sounds like you have a kind of vertigo called BPPV, which when you're lying down and you stand up, you're dizzy or change your position. And that there's also a maneuver that you can be taught by a professional. It's basically a way of sort of shaking the crystals in your ear back. I don't have BPV. I have no trouble at all getting up from a lying down position. I just get hit with really debilitating vertigo from time to time. And actually, I've been told that it has nothing to do with my hearing, that it's a form of migraine.
Ruth, it's your turn.
Steve,
Yes, Ruth.
it's Ruth. First of all, Tom, I had a cochlear implant 2 years ago. I'm coming up on my 2nd anniversary. I walked out of the hospital. I was in surgery at 7:30 and I walked out of the hospital at 1:30. I had absolutely no problem with any throwing up or anything else. The surgery took less than 2 hours. If you're a candidate, I recommend it. I want to say one other thing to all the people who have had vertigo. I had vertigo and I bought SEABANDS. They're bands that have a button that goes onto your wrist and it's going to make you dizzy and nauseous. They cost $8 and they worked for me like a charm. I could barely get out of bed. So all the drugstores have them and it's worth trying if you have vertigo.
Can I
Carolyn,
say?
Carolyn, please, and then Richard.
Okay.
No, Carolyn, please.
Oh, sorry,
You're
Carolyn.
first. Thank you.
Oh,
Go
I
ahead.
just
Carolyn.
want to, it's not, I am like Ruth. I had no problems. In fact, my balance has been better since I got my implant 4 years ago. And I walked
Richard.
out of the hospital a couple of hours after my surgery, no problem. But it's not a coincidence that at least at Westchester Medical Center, there's a lot of demand by, I assume, cochlear implant wearers for balance assistance. And it's an interesting coincidence that my cochlear implant surgeon, Katrina Steedham, who I think is the best at Westchester Medical Center, is also the director of the Balance Center. And so she is treating people who have balance problems, and so it's not unusual for people to have balance problems after they have had a cochlear implant. Nonetheless, it's not universal.
Thanks, Richard. Carolyn, are you still there?
I just wanted to mention, I got my implant in 2009, and unfortunately, I had to get a revision a year later. So I went to a different surgeon for the revision, and I was doing fine, but I did get vertigo maybe 6 months later, or during the first 6 months. And Dr. Rowland gave me like a anti-inflammatory pill, and it seemed to help, and it seemed to be like inflammation in the implant area, the tissue and what have you. And I took it for a while, and now, knock on wood, I don't have any problems. But it was horrible. I was getting vertigo, and though it's common, I guess now that I'm hearing everybody else's stories, that it's common. Okay.
Thanks, Carolyn. Any other questions or comments for Katherine? All right, if not, again, I'd really like to thank Katherine again for joining us. I think it was very informational to all of us. Your comments and questions certainly reflected on that. So again, whether you're a member of our chapter, New York City chapter, a guest or another chapter, I know we have people here from California and other areas. I know you'll enjoy asking any questions in the future about Katherine, reading her books, or dropping her an email. Okay. We'd like to invite you to stay with us if you'd like for our socialization period, and tell you about a couple upcoming events. We're having a picnic at FDR Park on Saturday, August 14th. We sent the flyer out. It's in our newsletter. It's no charge. We would like to you to RSVP so we could plan on the number of people coming. I mentioned Wednesday, September 8th. Our presentation is by InnoCaption. So if you like what you heard today and what I described about our other meetings, please invite your friends, relatives, and others with hearing loss to join our next chapter meeting. Again, we'd like to thank Katherine, and I'll now open it up to everybody. If you'd like to unmute and talk to each other, please do so, and we'll stay on as long as necessary.
Steve, I just want to say thank you very much, and thank you to your chapter. I am not going to stay for your social part because I know no one wants to hear my dog barking anymore. It's quite an exciting night here. I'm in Massachusetts right now. But I also just want to say that my email address is very readily available. I just put it in the chat. I get a lot of emails from people, and I pretty much always answer them, and I get into really interesting conversations with people. So, if you have any observations or if there's anything that you'd like me to write about in my blog, I always happy to have that kind of suggestion. Thank you very much, everybody, for showing up, and thank you so much, Steve, for making this happen. So I'm going to say goodbye. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Katherine.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Steve, for that information. I told Dan that you knew somebody. I couldn't remember the name, but thank you.
Yes, because I know they have an in-house AV person at this for the state conference at the hotel. But since we need looping, turn to Leo, who's done work with New York City, Westchester, a lot of the walks. He gives us a great price. He throws
Well,
in.
I thought of it and I couldn't remember the name, and I knew they were upstate somewhere. I just didn't know the detail.
Okay, so I'll shoot you his contact information. He's a great resource.
Yeah.
So if no one has anything else to add, thank you again for joining us. We'll see you in a few weeks at FDR Park and at our next meeting on September 8th. So have a great evening, everyone.
Okay.